The sun hung low on the horizon, painting the Texas sky in hues of crimson and gold as June Taylor stood motionless at the empty train station, her white wedding dress billowing softly in the evening breeze. Tears streamed down her face, smudging the carefully applied rouge on her cheeks. The diamond ring on her finger caught the dying light, a mocking reminder of promises broken. Beside her sat a solitary trunk containing everything she owned in the world. The man who had promised to make her his wife, to take her away from this dusty town to a new life in San Francisco, had never arrived. June glanced down at the watch pinned to her dress. 3 hours late. She knew in her heart he wasn't coming. Henry Blackburn, the banker's son, had changed his mind. All those whispered promises and grand plans had amounted to nothing but a woman in a wedding dress, abandoned at a train station in the middle of nowhere, Texas, in the summer of 1885. Miss. Station's closing soon. The ticket master called from inside his office, his voice tinged with pity. June nodded but made no move to leave. Where would she go? Back to her parents who had celebrated their daughter's good fortune in securing such a prosperous match. Back to face the town's gossip and pitying glances. The humiliation was too much to bear. The sound of horse hooves against packed dirt drew her attention. A tall man astride a chestnut mare approached, slowing as he neared the platform. His face was partially hidden beneath the brim of a well-worn Stetson, but June could make out a strong jawline covered in days-old stubble. His clothes were dusty from the trail, a simple shirt, leather vest, and worn denim pants tucked into scuffed boots. A cowboy, by the look of him, with a gun belt slung low on his hips. He dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent his life on horseback, tying his horse to the hitching post before approaching the platform. His eyes, a striking shade of green, took in the scene before him: the abandoned bride, the solitary trunk, the tear-stained face. "Waiting on someone, madam?" he asked, his voice deep and resonant. "Not anymore," June replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The cowboy's gaze softened as understanding dawned. He removed his hat, revealing thick, dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "Name's Quinn Hayes," he offered. "Most folks call me Quinn." "June Taylor," she replied automatically. Quinn nodded toward her trunk. "That all your belongings?" June nodded, feeling another tear track down her cheek. "He didn't show," Quinn stated rather than asked. "No." The word came out choked. The cowboy's jaw tightened as he surveyed the empty tracks. "Whoever he is," Quinn said softly, "he doesn't deserve you." June looked up sharply, surprised by the conviction in his voice. Quinn met her gaze steadily, then added with the faintest hint of a smile, "But I might." The boldness of his statement startled a small laugh from June's throat, momentarily cutting through her despair. "You don't even know me, Mr. Hayes." "Quinn," he corrected. "And no, I don't. But I know a man who'd leave a woman like you standing alone doesn't deserve a second thought." He glanced around the deserted station. "You got somewhere to go tonight, Miss Taylor." The reality of her situation came crashing back. June shook her head. "I gave up my room at the boarding house. Everything I own is in that trunk." Quinn nodded thoughtfully. "My sister Martha runs a respectable boarding house on the edge of town. Clean rooms, fair prices." He hesitated, then added, "She could use help around the place too if you're looking for work." June considered the offer. A place to stay and potential employment was more than she could have hoped for. Still, caution made her hesitate. "Why would you help a stranger?" Quinn's expression turned serious. "Because my ma raised me to believe a real man doesn't turn his back on someone in need." He gestured to her trunk. "May I?" After a moment's consideration, June nodded. Quinn lifted the heavy trunk with ease, carrying it to his horse. I can't ride with you, June protested, gesturing to her voluminous wedding dress. Quinn's eyes crinkled at the corners. Then we'll walk together, Miss Taylor. It's not far. As they set off, June stealing glances at the tall cowboy leading his horse beside her, she couldn't help but wonder if her misfortune might have led her to an unexpected crossroads. For the first time since realizing Henry wasn't coming, she felt a flicker of hope. The setting sun cast long shadows as they made their way through the small town of Redemption Springs. June was painfully aware of curious glances and whispered comments as they passed. A bride walking through town with a cowboy and her trunk in tow was bound to set tongues wagging. "Don't pay them any mind," Quinn advised quietly. "People will talk regardless of what you do." "I was supposed to be on a train to San Francisco by now," June said, her voice hollow. "Henry," she swallowed hard. "Henry said we'd start a new life there. He had business connections, opportunities." Quinn's expression remained carefully neutral. "Henry being the man who didn't show," June nodded, feeling foolish. "Henry Blackburn. His father owns the bank." Recognition flashed in Quinn's eyes. "Blackburn," he repeated, his tone revealing nothing of his thoughts. They walked in silence for a moment before June asked, "Do you know him?" "I know of him," Quinn replied carefully. "Our paths don't often cross. Bankers and cowboys tend to inhabit different worlds." June noted the diplomatic response but didn't press further. Instead, she asked, "What brings you to town today? Surely not rescuing abandoned brides." A small smile played at the corners of Quinn's mouth. "I came to sell some horses to the livery. Just finished the deal when I saw you at the station." He glanced at her. "Lucky timing, I suppose." "Lucky for me," June agreed softly. They turned onto a side street lined with modest homes. At the end stood a two-story house with a wide porch and a sign reading Hayes Boarding House. Warm light spilled from the windows, and the sound of conversation drifted from within. Quinn secured his horse to the hitching post and carried June's trunk up the steps. Before he could knock, the door swung open to reveal a woman with the same striking green eyes as Quinn, though her hair was a lighter brown, pulled back in a practical bun. "Quinn." "I wasn't expecting you tonight." Martha Hayes stopped mid-sentence, her gaze moving from her brother to June in her wedding finery, then to the trunk. "Martha," Quinn said calmly, "this is Miss June Taylor. She needs a room." Martha's expression shifted from surprise to understanding, then to warm hospitality in the span of seconds. "Of course. Please come in, Miss Taylor." June hesitated. "I should explain. There's time for explanations over tea," Martha interrupted kindly. "You look like you've had quite a day." Relief washed over June as she stepped into the warmth of the boarding house. The entry hall opened into a comfortable sitting room where several residents looked up with undisguised curiosity at the new arrival in her wedding dress. "This way," Martha directed, leading them past the onlookers to a small private parlor at the back of the house. "Quinn, put the lady's trunk by the stairs and then fetch us some tea." Quinn complied without argument, disappearing into what June presumed was the kitchen. "Now," Martha said once they were seated, "I won't pry, but I do need to know if there's any trouble I should be aware of." June appreciated the directness. "No trouble," she assured Martha. "Just a bride who was left at the altar, or rather at the train station." Martha's eyes softened with sympathy. "I see. And how do you know my brother?" "He found me at the station and offered to bring me here. We only just met." Quinn returned with a tea tray before Martha could respond. He set it down carefully and poured 3 cups with surprising grace for such large hands. "Quinn mentioned you might need help around the boarding house," June said, accepting her tea. "I don't have much money, but I'm a hard worker." Martha studied June thoughtfully. "What skills do you have, Miss Taylor?" I can cook, clean, so keep accounts. I helped my father in his general store before." She paused, then continued more softly, "before I was engaged." "And your family?" Martha probed gently. "Are they not in Redemption Springs?" June shook her head. "They moved to Denver last month after selling the store. She hesitated, the pain still fresh. "They weren't supportive of my engagement to Henry, said he was using me. I chose not to believe them." Quinn and Martha exchanged a glance that June couldn't interpret. "Well," Martha said decisively, "I do need help, particularly with the accounts and meal planning. I can offer room and board plus a small wage." She eyed June's wedding dress. "And perhaps we can find you something more suitable to wear tomorrow." "Thank you," June said, feeling overwhelmed by the kindness of these strangers. "I don't know how to repay you both." "No need," Quinn assured her, rising to his feet. "Martha, I'll stable my horse and be back for dinner." After Quinn left, Martha showed June to a small but clean room on the second floor. "Rest a bit before dinner," she suggested. "We eat at 6. The washroom is at the end of the hall if you'd like to freshen up." Left alone, June sank onto the narrow bed, her wedding dress pooling around her. Only hours ago, she had imagined herself on a train heading west with her new husband. Now she was in a stranger's boarding house with nothing but an uncertain future ahead. She removed the wilted flowers from her hair and carefully took off her wedding ring, placing it in a small pocket of her trunk. Tears threatened again, but June forced them back. Crying wouldn't change what had happened. She needed to focus on moving forward. After washing her face and doing her best to make herself presentable, June made her way downstairs for dinner. The dining room accommodated about a dozen people, with Martha bustling about serving hearty portions of beef stew and fresh bread. Quinn sat at the far end of the table, deep in conversation with an older man. He looked up as June entered, his conversation faltering mid-sentence. Several other diners also paused to observe the newcomer, who had changed from her wedding dress into a simple blue dress she'd packed for her honeymoon journey. Martha immediately came to her rescue. "Everyone, this is Miss June Taylor. She'll be staying with us and helping me run the place. Make her feel welcome." A chorus of greetings followed as June took the empty seat Martha indicated coincidentally, or perhaps not, beside Quinn. "Feeling better?" he asked quietly as Martha served her a bowl of stew. "A little," June admitted. "Thank you again for your kindness." "Don't mention it." Quinn broke off a piece of bread and passed the remainder to June. "Martha says you'll be helping around the boarding house." June nodded. "I need the work, and it's generous of her to offer." "My sister has good instincts about people," Quinn said, his green eyes studying her. "If she thinks you'll do well here, you will." The meal progressed with casual conversation flowing around the table. June learned that most of the boarders were workers from town, a schoolteacher, a clerk from the general store, a seamstress, and several men who worked at the sawmill. Quinn, it seemed, was a regular visitor rather than a resident, his ranch being some miles outside of town. After dinner, as the boarders dispersed to the sitting room or their own quarters, Quinn approached June. "I should be heading back to my ranch soon, but I wanted to make sure you're settling in all right." "I am, thank you," June assured him, though uncertainty still gnawed at her. "Your sister has been very kind." Quinn hesitated, then said, "I'll be in town again in a few days." "Perhaps by then you'll have had time to think about what comes next." June frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "Just that Redemption Springs might not have been where you planned to build your life," Quinn explained. "Once the shock wears off, you might want to join your family in Denver or continue to San Francisco on your own terms." The thought hadn't occurred to June yet, too consumed as she was with the immediate crisis. "I hadn't thought that far ahead," she admitted. Quinn nodded, understanding. No need to decide anything tonight. Get some rest, Miss Taylor. June, she corrected, offering a small smile. If I'm to call you Quinn, you should call me June. Something warm flickered in Quinn's eyes. June, then. He reached for his hat. Good night. Good night, Quinn. As he turned to leave, June found herself watching him go with a curious sensation in her chest. In the span of a few hours, this stranger had shown her more kindness and respect than Henry had in their months of courtship. The realization was both comforting and unsettling. The next morning, June woke early, determined to earn her keep at the boarding house. She found Martha already at work in the kitchen, preparing breakfast for the residents. Good morning, June greeted. How can I help? Martha looked up with a smile. You're an early riser. Good. Could you start the coffee and then set the table? We serve breakfast at 7 sharp. June fell into the routine easily, finding comfort in the familiar tasks. As they worked side by side, Martha explained the daily operations of the boarding house. Breakfast and dinner were provided daily, rooms were cleaned weekly, and laundry was done on Mondays and Thursdays. I usually manage the accounts on Sunday afternoons, Martha added. If you're handy with numbers, that would be a tremendous help. I'd be happy to assist, June assured her. My father taught me bookkeeping from a young age. As the boarders began to filter in for breakfast, Martha lowered her voice. I should warn you, word about what happened yesterday has likely spread. People may ask questions or offer unwanted opinions. June's stomach tightened, but she nodded resolutely. I expected as much. Small towns run on gossip. Indeed they do, Martha agreed. Just remember, you don't owe anyone your story. The morning passed in a blur of activity, serving breakfast, clearing dishes, helping Martha with the laundry, and learning the layout and routines of the boarding house. By midday, June was exhausted but grateful for the distraction from her thoughts. After a simple lunch, Martha suggested June take some time to explore the town. You'll need to know your way around if you're staying, she pointed out. And it's best to face the gossips head-on rather than hiding away. June saw the wisdom in this, though the prospect of facing the town's curiosity was daunting. She borrowed a light shawl from Martha and set out, determined to hold her head high. Redemption Springs was larger than it first appeared, a main street lined with businesses, several side streets of residences, and a small church with an adjoining cemetery on the hill, overlooking the town. June walked slowly, noting the general store, the dressmaker's shop, the saloon, and the bank, Blackburn's Bank. She paused outside the imposing brick building, her heart racing. Through the large windows she could see activity inside, though not clearly enough to discern individuals. Was Henry in there? Had he returned to town after abandoning her, or had he never left at all? The questions churned in her mind. Miss Taylor, June turned to find a young woman watching her with undisguised curiosity. It took her a moment to place the seamstress from the boarding house. Miss Winters, June acknowledged with a nod. I just wanted to say, we're all very sorry about what happened with Mr. Blackburn, the woman said, her expression a mixture of sympathy and excitement at being the one to broach the subject. It was terribly cruel of him. June forced a polite smile. Thank you for your concern. Is it true he ran off with a saloon girl from Silver Creek? Miss Winters asked, leaning in conspiratorially. Shock rendered June momentarily speechless. I wouldn't know, she finally managed. That's what they're saying, Miss Winters continued, apparently oblivious to June's distress. That he's been seeing her for months and finally chose her over. She caught herself and had the grace to look embarrassed. Well, anyway, you're better off without him if you ask me. Before June could respond, a deep voice interrupted. Miss Winters, I believe Mrs. Peterson was looking for you at the dress shop. Something about an alteration needed urgently. Quinn stood a few paces away, his expression neutral but his eyes hard as he regarded the seamstress. Miss Winters flushed. "Oh, yes, I should get back. Good day, Miss Taylor." She hurried off without meeting Quinn's gaze. "I didn't expect to see you in town today," June said once they were alone. "Needed supplies," Quinn explained, gesturing to saddlebags slung over his shoulder. His eyes softened as he looked at her. "How are you holding up? Is it true?" June asked instead of answering. "About Henry and a woman from Silver Creek," Quinn hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "There have been rumors for a while. I didn't know if they were true, but now it seems they were," June finished for him, a fresh wave of humiliation washing over her. "Everyone must have known. Everyone except me." Quinn stepped closer, his voice gentle. "Some people suspected, but that doesn't make what he did any less wrong or any reflection on you." June laughed bitterly. "Doesn't it? What kind of fool doesn't realize her fiancé is in love with someone else?" "The kind who sees the best in people," Quinn replied steadily. "The kind who trusts and believes in promises made. That's not foolishness, June. That's decency." His words penetrated the haze of shame surrounding her. June looked up at him, really looked at him for the first time in daylight. Quinn Hayes was handsome in a rugged way, his face weathered by sun and wind, his eyes clear and direct. There was something reassuring about his presence, a steadiness that seemed to ground her. "Thank you," she said softly, "for saying that and for rescuing me from Miss Winters." Quinn's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Looked like you needed saving. Again." "I'm not usually this helpless," June assured him, finding herself smiling back despite everything. "In fact, I'm typically quite self-sufficient." "I don't doubt it," Quinn replied. "Sometimes even the strongest people need a helping hand." He glanced toward the bank, then back at June. "Would you allow me to walk with you?" "I was heading to the general store." June nodded, grateful for the company and the buffer against more curious townsfolk. As they walked side by side, she found herself relaxing slightly. "Tell me about your ranch," she requested, eager to think about anything other than her own situation. Quinn's face lit up at the subject. "It's not large by Texas standards, about 500 acres. Used to be my father's place. He raised cattle, but I've shifted more toward horses. Breaking and training them suits me better than driving cattle to market." "You live there alone?" June asked, then immediately regretted the personal nature of the question. If Quinn was offended, he didn't show it. "Just me and a couple of hands who help with the heavier work. Been on my own since Pa died 5 years back. Ma passed when Martha and I were young." "I'm sorry," June said softly. Quinn shrugged. "It's the way of things out here. Life is rarely easy, but it has its rewards." They reached the general store, where Quinn collected various supplies: coffee, flour, salt, ammunition for his rifle, and a few other necessities. June found herself oddly comfortable in his company, their conversation flowing naturally as they moved through the store. As Quinn paid for his purchases, the shopkeeper gave June a curious look. "Miss Taylor, isn't it? Heard you're working at the Hayes place now." "That's right," June confirmed, keeping her tone pleasant but reserved. "Good folks, the Hayes family," the man commented, bagging Quinn's supplies. "Known them since they were knee-high to a grasshopper. Their pa was one of the finest men in the county." "So I've heard," June replied, noting the way Quinn's shoulders straightened almost imperceptibly at the mention of his father. They left the store together, Quinn carrying his purchases in one hand. "I should get these back to the ranch before dark," he said, a hint of reluctance in his voice. "Of course," June agreed. "Thank you for the company." Quinn hesitated, then said, "I'll be at the Saturday social at the church this weekend. Martha usually brings all the boarders. Will you be there?" The thought of facing the entire town at a social gathering was intimidating, but June found herself nodding. "I suppose I will." "Good," Quinn said simply. "I'll look for you." As they parted ways, June couldn't help but feel a strange anticipation for Saturday, despite her lingering heartache. There was something about Quinn Hayes that made her feel seen not as the abandoned bride or an object of pity, but as a person of value. The days leading up to the Saturday social passed in a blur of activity as June settled into her role at the boarding house. She proved adept at managing the accounts, freeing Martha to focus on other aspects of running the establishment. The work was satisfying, and the routine helped keep her mind from dwelling too much on her circumstances. News from town filtered in through the boarders. Henry Blackburn had indeed left Redemption Springs. Though whether with a saloon girl or simply to avoid facing the consequences of his actions remained unclear. His father, Josiah Blackburn, continued to run the bank with his usual stern efficiency, neither acknowledging nor denying his son's disgraceful behavior. By the time Saturday arrived, June had steeled herself for the inevitable scrutiny she would face at the social. Martha helped her prepare, lending her a pretty cream-colored dress with a modest blue sash that suited June's fair complexion. "You look lovely," Martha assured her as they walked toward the church together, the other boarders following behind. "Just remember to hold your head high. You've done nothing wrong." The church grounds were already bustling with activity when they arrived. Tables laden with food lined one side of the yard, while musicians set up near the steps. Children darted between groups of adults, their laughter filling the air. June felt the weight of stares as they joined the gathering, but Martha's steady presence beside her gave her courage. They had just reached the refreshment table when a hush fell over the nearest group, their eyes fixed on something beyond June's shoulder. "Afternoon, ladies," Quinn's voice came from behind them. June turned to find him standing there, freshly shaved and dressed in clean clothes, dark trousers, a crisp white shirt, and a vest that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. His hair was still damp from washing, and he held his hat in his hands. "Quinn," Martha greeted her brother with a smile. "Right on time for once." "Couldn't miss the best pies in the county," he replied, his eyes shifting to June. Something in his expression softened. "Miss Taylor, you look well." "Thank you," June replied, feeling an unexpected warmth rise to her cheeks. "As do you." Martha glanced between them, a knowing look crossing her face. "I see Mrs. Henderson over there. I should say hello. June, why don't you show Quinn where we put our contribution to the potluck?" Before June could protest, Martha was gone, leaving her alone with Quinn amid the curious onlookers. "Your sister isn't subtle," June observed wryly. Quinn chuckled. "Never has been." He offered his arm. "Shall we find that food she mentioned?" June hesitated only briefly before placing her hand on his arm. The solid warmth of him was reassuring as they navigated through the crowd. Some people nodded politely, others whispered behind their hands. June forced herself to keep her chin up, focusing on Quinn's steady presence beside her. They had just reached the food tables when a commanding voice cut through the ambient chatter. "Miss Taylor." June tensed, recognizing the voice immediately. Slowly, she turned to face Josiah Blackburn, a tall, imposing man with iron gray hair and cold blue eyes so like his son's. He stood rigidly before them, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Blackburn," June acknowledged with a slight nod, acutely aware of Quinn's arm tensing beneath her hand. "I believe we have matters to discuss," Blackburn stated, his gaze flickering dismissively over Quinn before returning to June. Privately, June lifted her chin. "I don't believe we have anything to discuss, Mr. Blackburn." The banker's expression hardened. "There is the matter of the wedding expenses. Considerable sums were spent on your behalf." A shocked murmur rippled through the onlookers who had gathered to witness the confrontation. June felt as though she'd been slapped. "Expenses which your son incurred when he asked for my hand," June replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Expenses which pale in comparison to the humiliation of being abandoned at a train station in my wedding dress." Blackburn's jaw tightened. "My son realized his mistake before it was too late. A fortunate escape for all concerned, I should think." Quinn stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. "That's enough, Blackburn." The banker's cold eyes shifted to Quinn. "This doesn't concern you, Hayes. It concerns me when you publicly harass a lady under my sister's protection," Quinn replied evenly. "Whatever grievance you think you have with Miss Taylor can be addressed through proper channels, not at a church social." Blackburn's face flushed with anger, but something in Quinn's steady gaze made him reconsider. After a tense moment, he inclined his head stiffly. "Another time, then." His eyes returned to June. "This matter isn't settled." As Blackburn stalked away, June released a shaky breath. "Thank you," she whispered to Quinn, "but you shouldn't have involved yourself. The Blackburns are powerful in this town." "So are the Hayes," Quinn replied simply. He guided her toward a quieter corner of the gathering. "Are you all right?" June nodded, though she felt far from all right. "I knew there would be talk, but I didn't expect to be publicly accused of." "What exactly? Costing them money by being jilted?" Quinn's expression darkened. "Blackburn's pride is hurt. His son's behavior reflects poorly on him, so he's trying to shift the blame." "It's absurd," June said, a hint of anger finally breaking through her composure. "It is," Quinn agreed, "and no one with any sense believes it." The musicians began to play, signaling the start of the dancing. Quinn glanced toward the forming sets, then back at June. "Would you care to dance, Miss Taylor? Might help people find something new to gossip about." Despite everything, June found herself smiling at his straightforward manner. "I'd like that, Mr. Hayes." As Quinn led her to join the dancers, June was aware of the many eyes upon them, but for the first time since arriving in Redemption Springs, she didn't feel like a victim. With Quinn's hand steady at her waist as they moved through the patterns of the dance, she felt something new stirring within her, a sense of possibility, perhaps even hope. The evening progressed more pleasantly than June could have anticipated. After the first dance, others approached her, women who had known her from her days at her father's store, men who had been customers, children who remembered the candy she sometimes slipped them. Not everyone was kind, of course. Some women whispered behind fans, and some men watched her with speculation in their eyes. But with Quinn never far from her side, June found she could bear the scrutiny with dignity. As twilight deepened, lanterns were lit around the churchyard, casting a warm glow over the festivities. June and Quinn had taken a moment's respite from dancing and stood near the edge of the gathering, watching as couples twirled to a lively tune. "Thank you for this evening," June said softly. "It's been healing in a way." Quinn studied her face in the lantern light. "You're stronger than you think, June Taylor. Most women would have crumbled under what you faced." "I nearly did," she admitted. "If you hadn't found me at that train station." "You'd have found your way," Quinn assured her. "I just made the path a little easier." June wasn't so certain, but she appreciated his confidence in her. A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched the dancers. "May I ask you something?" June ventured after a moment. "Anything." "What did you mean that first day when you said Henry didn't deserve me but you might?" The question had lingered in her mind for days. Quinn seemed surprised by the question, or perhaps by her directness. He considered his words carefully before answering. "I suppose I meant that a man should value what he's fortunate enough to have," he said finally. "That I could see, even in that moment, that you were someone worth cherishing, not abandoning." He met her eyes. "And that given the chance, I wouldn't make the same mistake he did." June's breath caught at the simple honesty in his words. Before she could respond, Martha approached, a hint of concern in her expression. "I hate to interrupt, but Mrs. Wilson is feeling unwell. I think we should head back to the boarding house," Martha explained. Quinn nodded, immediately solicitous. "Of course, I'll help you get everyone home." The walk back to the boarding house was subdued, with Mrs. Wilson, an elderly widow who occupied the room across from June's, leaning heavily on Martha's arm. Quinn carried the baskets that had held their potluck contributions, walking beside June in companionable silence. At the boarding house, Quinn helped settle the ailing Mrs. Wilson before joining June and Martha on the porch. "Will you stay in town tonight?" Martha asked her brother. "It's late to be riding back to the ranch." Quinn shook his head. "Moon's bright enough, I'll make it fine." He turned to June. "Thank you for the dances, Miss Taylor." "June," she reminded him softly, "and thank you for everything today." Something flickered in Quinn's eyes, a warmth that made June's heart beat a little faster. "I'll be back in town Tuesday for supplies. Perhaps I could call on you then." "I'd like that," June replied. Aware of Martha's interested gaze, Quinn nodded, satisfied. "Tuesday, then." "Good night, June, Martha." They watched as he mounted his horse and rode off into the night, the sound of hoofbeats gradually fading into the distance. Martha turned to June with a knowing smile. "My brother seems quite taken with you." June felt her cheeks warm. "He's been kind, that's all." "Quinn is always kind," Martha agreed, "but I've rarely seen him so attentive to anyone." She patted June's hand. "Just an observation. Now, let's check on Mrs. Wilson before turning in." Later, as June prepared for bed in her small room, she found herself reflecting on the day's events. The confrontation with Josiah Blackburn had been unpleasant, but perhaps necessary, a reminder that her past with Henry wasn't entirely behind her. Yet the memory that lingered most was the feeling of Quinn's hand steady at her waist as they danced, the quiet conviction in his voice when he spoke of cherishing rather than abandoning. It was too soon, she told herself firmly. Her heart was still raw from Henry's betrayal. She hardly knew Quinn Hayes, despite the connection she felt to him. And yet, as she drifted toward sleep, it was his face she saw, those steady green eyes and the hint of a smile that seemed reserved just for her. The following days passed in a rhythm of work and gradual healing. June threw herself into her duties at the boarding house, finding satisfaction in the orderly keeping of accounts and the grateful smiles of the residents when she prepared special treats for afternoon tea. Martha proved to be not just an employer but a friend, sharing stories of growing up in Redemption Springs and offering June gentle guidance as she adjusted to her new life. Tuesday arrived with a sense of anticipation that June tried to downplay even to herself. She went about her morning tasks with particular attention, changing her apron twice before Martha finally commented with amusement that she'd wear out the fabric at this rate. "He's just coming for a visit," June protested, smoothing her hair self-consciously. "Of course he is," Martha agreed, her eyes twinkling. "And you've just happened to bake his favorite apple cake by coincidence." June couldn't deny that. She had casually inquired about Quinn's preferences the day before and had risen early to ensure the cake would be perfect. Quinn arrived mid-afternoon, looking much as he had the first day she'd met him, dusty from the trail, his hat pulled low against the sun. But his face brightened visibly when he saw June waiting on the porch, and he removed his hat as he approached. "Miss Taylor," he greeted her, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "You're a sight for sore eyes." "Mr. Hayes," she returned, unable to suppress her own smile. "You look like you could use some refreshment after your ride." "I wouldn't say no to that," Quinn agreed, following her inside. They settled in the small parlor at the back of the house, where June had laid out tea and the apple cake. Quinn ate with evident appreciation, complimenting her baking skills between bites. "Martha said you made this specially," he commented, accepting a second piece. "How did you know it was my favorite?" June felt her cheeks warm. "I might have asked." Quinn's expression softened. "Thank you. It reminds me of my mother's recipe." "Martha shared it with me," June admitted. "She said your mother made it every fall after the apple harvest." Quinn nodded, a faraway look in his eyes. "She did. The whole house would smell of cinnamon and apples. Pa would say it was worth enduring the heat of summer just to reach apple cake season." The mention of his parents opened a door to conversation about their childhoods, Quinn and Martha growing up on the ranch, June in the bustling town of Abilene before her family moved to Redemption Springs. They shared stories of youthful adventures and misadventures, finding common ground in their experiences despite the different paths their lives had taken. "What brought your family to Redemption Springs?" Quinn asked as June poured more tea. "My father heard there was opportunity here, a general store for sale, good prospects for growth." June's expression turned wistful. He was right about the opportunities, but then his health began to fail. "The doctor in Denver is supposedly one of the best for his condition, so they sold the store and moved there last year." "And you stayed behind because of your engagement," Quinn surmised. June nodded. "Henry courted me for nearly a year before proposing. My parents were never entirely comfortable with him. They thought he was too smooth, too practiced." She sighed. "I should have listened to them." Quinn considered this. "Sometimes we have to learn truths for ourselves, no matter how painful the lesson." "That's a generous way of looking at my foolishness," June said with a small, self-deprecating laugh. "Not foolishness," Quinn corrected firmly. "Trust. There's a difference." June studied him, struck again by his unfailing kindness. "You always see the best in situations, don't you?" Quinn shrugged. "Life's taught me that dwelling on what might have been is a waste of good thinking time. Better to look forward than back." Their conversation was interrupted by Martha's arrival, her expression apologetic. "I'm sorry to intrude, but Mrs. Peterson is here about the rooms for her sister's visit next month. Could you help me with the arrangements, June?" "Of course," June agreed, rising to her feet. She turned to Quinn. "I'm afraid duty calls." "I understand," Quinn assured her. He hesitated, then added, "There's a full moon this Friday. I thought I might take a ride along the river. Would you care to join me?" Martha could come along as chaperone, of course. The invitation took June by surprise, but a sense of pleasure quickly followed. "I'd like that very much." Quinn's face lit with a smile. "I'll come by around sunset then." As he took his leave, June found herself looking forward to Friday with an eagerness that both excited and alarmed her. It had been less than 2 weeks since Henry's betrayal, yet already her heart seemed to be healing, turning toward new possibilities like a flower seeking the sun. Friday evening arrived clear and warm, with a gentle breeze stirring the trees as June waited on the porch of the boarding house. She wore her best riding skirt, borrowed from Martha, who had also insisted on lending her a pretty blue shirtwaist that brought out her eyes. Quinn arrived precisely at sunset, leading not one but 2 horses, his own chestnut mare and a gentle-looking bay gelding. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance, his hair still damp from washing and his clothes fresh and neat. "The bay is Daisy," Quinn explained as he helped June mount. "She's steady as they come." Used to be Martha's before she decided running a boarding house was more to her liking than riding the range. Martha, who had emerged to serve as their chaperone, snorted at this characterization. "I simply recognized my talents lay elsewhere," she corrected, accepting Quinn's help onto her own mount. a dappled gray. Unlike some, I don't need to commune with horses to feel fulfilled. The siblings' easy banter continued as they rode out of town, following a well-worn trail that led toward the river. June, initially nervous about riding after so long, quickly found her confidence returning. Daisy was indeed as steady as promised, responding to the lightest touch of the reins. The countryside opened before them, rolling hills dotted with mesquite trees. Stretches of prairie grass turned golden in the fading light, and in the distance, the silver ribbon of the river catching the first gleam of moonlight. The beauty of it stole June's breath. "It's magnificent," she said softly. Quinn, riding beside her, nodded in agreement. "This is my favorite time of day out here, when the land settles into twilight and everything goes quiet, waiting for the night." They reached the river just as the full moon cleared the eastern horizon, huge and luminous, casting enough light to see by without their lantern. Quinn led them to a clearing near the bank where a large oak tree provided a natural resting place. He helped both women dismount, then spread a blanket beneath the tree. "I brought some supper," he announced, producing a bundle from his saddlebag. "Nothing fancy, just some of Martha's fried chicken, biscuits, and apple tarts. Prepared by June, I'll have you know," Martha added with a conspiratorial wink to June. "She's becoming quite the baker." The three settled on the blanket to enjoy their picnic supper, the sound of the flowing river and chirping crickets providing a peaceful backdrop to their conversation. Martha, true to her role as chaperone, kept the talk general local news, plans for the harvest festival coming up in a few weeks, stories of past adventures along this same river. After they had eaten, Martha stretched dramatically. "I think I'll walk a bit along the bank," she announced. "My old bones need movement after that ride." She fixed Quinn with a meaningful look. "I won't go far." As Martha strolled away, leaving them alone beneath the oak tree, June felt a flutter of nervous anticipation. Quinn seemed similarly affected, clearing his throat before speaking. "I hope you're enjoying the evening," he said, his voice softened for privacy despite Martha's distance. "Very much," June assured him. "It's been a long time since I've ridden or had a picnic under the stars." Quinn nodded, his gaze moving to the moonlit river. "When I was a boy, my father used to say that to understand Texas, you had to see it by moonlight. That only then could you appreciate its true character, how it holds its beauty in reserve, revealing itself fully only to those patient enough to look." June watched his profile as he spoke, struck by the poetry in his words. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," Quinn agreed. "Taught me everything important: how to work hard, treat people fairly, and appreciate the land that sustains us." He turned to face her, his expression serious in the silvery light. "He also taught me to recognize value when I see it." The intent in his words was unmistakable, and June felt her pulse quicken. "Quinn, I know it's soon," he interrupted gently. "Too soon, perhaps. You're still healing from what happened with Blackburn. But I want you to know that I admire you, June. Your strength, your dignity in the face of gossip, your kindness to everyone at Martha's place." He hesitated, then continued. "I'd like to court you properly if you'd allow it. No rush, no pressure. Just a chance to see if what I feel might be something you could come to share." June was momentarily speechless, touched by his directness and the sincerity in his eyes. Part of her wanted to respond with equal openness, to admit that despite the brief time they'd known each other, she already felt a connection to him that had never existed with Henry. But caution held her back. "I'm honored by your regard," she said carefully, "and I can't deny that I've come to value your friendship greatly." She took a steadying breath. "But you're right, it is soon. I'm still making sense of what happened, still finding my footing in this new life." Quinn nodded, no disappointment visible in his expression. I understand. And I'm content to wait to give you the time you need. He smiled slightly. I'm not going anywhere, June Taylor. The simple promise warmed her more than any passionate declaration could have. Thank you, she said softly, for understanding and for being so patient with me. Patience is a cowboy's stock in trade, Quinn replied lightly. Comes from breaking horses. The ones worth having can't be rushed. The comparison startled a laugh from June. Are you comparing me to a wild Mustang, Mr. Hayes? Maybe a bit, Quinn admitted with a grin. Though I'd never dream of trying to break your spirit, just hoping to earn your trust, day by day. Their eyes met in the moonlight, and June felt something shift between them, a deepening of connection, a silent acknowledgement of possibilities yet to unfold. Before either could speak again, Martha's voice called from nearby. If you two are finished with your private chat, we should start back. It's getting late, and I have breakfast to prepare in the morning. The ride back to town was peaceful, with conversation flowing easily among the three of them. June found herself increasingly comfortable in Quinn's company, appreciating his steady presence and the way he never pushed or presumed. At the boarding house, Quinn helped both women dismount before seeing to the horses. As Martha went inside to prepare for bed, he lingered with June on the porch. Thank you for coming tonight, he said, his hat in his hands. It meant a great deal to me. I enjoyed it very much, June replied honestly. Perhaps we could do it again sometime. Quinn's face brightened. I'd like that. He hesitated, then asked, May I call on you next week? I need to check on some business at the bank. His expression darkened slightly at the mention of the establishment. June tensed involuntarily. The bank? Will you be seeing Mr. Blackburn? Unfortunately, Quinn confirmed. There's a matter concerning water rights that needs settling. But I'd rather focus on the pleasant part of the trip, seeing you. June appreciated his attempt to lighten the mood, but a nagging worry remained. Quinn, be careful with Josiah Blackburn. I fear he harbors ill will toward me and now perhaps toward you by association. Quinn's expression turned serious. Don't worry about Blackburn. He may own the bank, but he doesn't own this town, no matter what he thinks. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. I can handle Josiah Blackburn. You focus on building your new life here. The warmth of his hand around hers was reassuring, and June found herself squeezing his fingers in response. Just promise me you won't do anything rash. I promise, Quinn agreed. He lifted her hand, and with a questioning glance that she answered with a small nod, pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Good night, June. Good night, Quinn. As June watched him ride away, a mixture of emotions swirled within her: concern about his upcoming confrontation with Blackburn, lingering caution about opening her heart again so soon, but overriding both, a growing sense that Quinn Hayes represented something she'd never truly had with Henry, a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine affection. The following week passed in a blur of activity at the boarding house. A traveling salesman arrived for a 3-day stay, requiring extra attention and meals. Mrs. Wilson took a turn for the worse, necessitating a visit from the doctor and round-the-clock care that June and Martha shared. The laundry mountain seemed never-ending, and the accounts needed reconciling before month's end. Throughout it all, June found her thoughts returning to Quinn and his offer of courtship. The more she considered it, the more she realized that her hesitation stemmed not from uncertainty about him, but from fear of her own judgment. How could she trust herself after being so thoroughly deceived by Henry? And yet, Quinn was nothing like Henry. Where Henry had been smooth and polished, Quinn was straightforward and genuine. Henry had promised her the world. Quinn offered only himself, with no guarantees except his respect and patience. The differences were stark, and increasingly, June found herself drawn to Quinn's honest nature. When Wednesday arrived, the day Quinn had mentioned he would be in town, June found herself watching the street from the boarding house windows, anticipation fluttering in her stomach. By mid-morning, her distraction was obvious enough that Martha commented on it with gentle amusement. "He'll be here when his business is done," Martha assured her. "Quinn always keeps his word." June flushed at being so transparent. "I'm just concerned about his meeting with Mr. Blackburn. Things were rather tense at the social." Martha's expression grew more serious. "That's a valid concern. Josiah Blackburn is not a man who forgets a slight, real or imagined." She hesitated, then added, "There's history there that predates your situation. Bad blood between the Blackburns and the Hayes family going back years." June looked at her in surprise. "What kind of history?" Martha sighed, settling into a chair. "It's an old story. When our father first came to these parts, he and Josiah Blackburn were actually friends of a sort. They arrived around the same time, both looking to build something lasting. Pa chose ranching. Blackburn went into banking." She paused, her expression distant with memory. "Their paths diverged further when Pa married our mother, Sarah Winters. She was then. The story goes that Blackburn had set his sights on her as well, but she chose Pa without a second thought." "A romantic rivalry," June murmured, beginning to understand. Martha nodded. "Blackburn married Alina Jenkins about a year later, Henry's mother. By all accounts, it was a practical match rather than a love match. She brought money and connections to the marriage." "And did the enmity between your father and Mr. Blackburn continue?" "It simmered," Martha explained. "Flared occasionally over business matters, but it really broke into the open during the drought of '72. Blackburn called in loans from struggling ranchers all over the county, including a hefty one from our father. Pa had just enough to cover it, but many others didn't. Families lost land that had been theirs for generations." "How terrible," June said softly, imagining the devastation. "Pa never forgave him for it. Said Blackburn showed his true colors, that he valued money over people, profit over community." Martha's eyes held a hint of old anger. "After that, they were openly adversarial until Pa's death. And has Josiah Blackburn carried that grudge against you and Quinn?" "In his way," Martha confirmed. "Nothing overt, but little things, delays in processing banking business, higher interest rates than offered to others, spreading rumors about the quality of Quinn's horses." June frowned, troubled by this information. "And now I've given him fresh reason to target you both by accepting your help after Henry left me." Martha reached across to pat June's hand. "Don't blame yourself for Blackburn's petness. Quinn and I make our own choices, and neither of us regrets taking you in." Her expression softened. "Especially Quinn." Before June could respond, the front door opened, and the subject of their conversation strode in, his expression thunderous. Quinn's usually neat appearance was disheveled, his shirt half untucked, a smudge of dirt on his jaw, and what appeared to be the beginnings of a bruise forming near his right eye. "Quinn," Martha exclaimed, rising to her feet. "What happened to you?" Quinn removed his hat, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "Had a disagreement with Blackburn, and then a more physical disagreement with his new bank guard." June hurried forward, concern overriding everything else. "You're hurt," she said, gently touching his arm. "Sit down. I'll fetch some cold water for that eye." Quinn allowed himself to be guided to a chair while Martha went to find her medical supplies. June returned quickly with a basin of cold water and a clean cloth, which she pressed carefully to the developing bruise. "What happened?" she asked, her voice low with worry. Quinn winced slightly at the pressure on his injury. Blackburn refused to honor an agreement we'd made about the water rights, said the terms had changed. His jaw tightened. When I pointed out that we had a signed contract, he suggested that perhaps recent events had affected my judgment specifically, my association with women of questionable character. June flinched at the clear reference to her. He meant me. He did, Quinn confirmed, his voice hardening. I informed him that he was out of line. Things escalated from there. And the bank guard, Martha asked, returning with a bottle of witch hazel and bandages, tried to remove me from the premises when I refused to leave without Blackburn honoring our deal. Quinn's mouth curved in a grim smile. He may have gotten in a lucky hit, but he'll be sporting worse than this tomorrow. Oh, Quinn, June murmured, distressed. This is exactly what I feared. You're in conflict with the Blackburns because of me. Quinn caught her hand, stilling her ministrations. No, June. This conflict has been brewing for years. What happened today was just the latest chapter in a long story. His eyes held hers intently. And for the record, I would do it again in a heartbeat. Martha made a sound that was half exasperation, half pride. You Hayes men and your principles. Pa was just the same, never could back down when he thought he was in the right. She began applying witch hazel to Quinn's bruise with brisk efficiency. What will you do about the water rights? Quinn grimaced both at the sting of the medicine and the question. Not sure yet. Without access to that stream, the east section of my property is useless for grazing during dry spells. Could you speak with the judge? June suggested. If you have a signed contract. Judge Parker is away until next month, Quinn explained, and Blackburn knows it. He's counting on me being desperate enough to accept his new terms before Parker returns. Martha finished treating his injury and stepped back, surveying her work. Well, you can't ride back to the ranch looking like you've been in a brawl. You'll stay for dinner, at least. Quinn nodded his agreement, though his expression remained troubled. As Martha went to inform the cook about the extra person for dinner, June sat beside Quinn, her own worry evident. I'm sorry this happened, she said softly. Martha told me about the history between your families. I had no idea. It's not something we discuss much, Quinn admitted. Most of it happened long ago. He studied her face. Does it trouble you, knowing there's bad blood between the Hayes and the Blackburns? June considered the question carefully. It troubles me that you might suffer for extending kindness to me. But it doesn't change how I feel about, she hesitated, then continued more softly, about your place in my life. Something warmed in Quinn's eyes at her words. And what place is that exactly? June felt heat rise to her cheeks but held his gaze steadily. A growing one, I think. It wasn't a declaration of love or even an explicit acceptance of his offer of courtship, but from Quinn's expression, it was enough for now. He reached for her hand, interlacing their fingers in a gesture that felt both protective and promising. I can work with growing, he said with a small smile. Dinner was a lively affair, with the boarders full of questions about Quinn's altercation at the bank. News traveled fast in Redemption Springs, and already there were varying accounts of what had transpired. Quinn downplayed the incident, steering conversation toward more pleasant topics, and occasionally catching June's eye across the table with a private smile that made her heart flutter. After the meal, as twilight settled over the town, Quinn prepared to depart despite Martha's offer of a bed for the night. I should get back to check on things, he explained. My hands are capable, but there's a mare due to foal any day now. June walked with him to the porch, aware of curious eyes watching from within the house, but unable to deny herself these few moments alone with him. Will you be all right? She asked, nodding toward his bruised eye. Riding in the dark with an injury. Quinn's expression softened. I've ridden through worse in my time. Don't worry about me. I do, though, June admitted. Worry about you. The simple confession seemed to please him immensely. Well, then I'll be extra careful, knowing you're concerned for my welfare. He reached out to touch her cheek lightly. May I call on you Sunday after church? Perhaps we could walk in the park. I'd like that very much, June replied, leaning slightly into his touch. Quinn hesitated, then bent forward to place a gentle, fleeting kiss on her forehead. Until Sunday, then. June watched him ride away, a mixture of emotions swirling within her: concern for his safety, anger at Josiah Blackburn's manipulation, and a growing warmth that spread through her chest whenever Quinn was near. As she turned to go back inside, she realized with sudden clarity that despite her initial caution, her heart was already committed to a path that led straight to Quinn Hayes. Sunday arrived clear and bright, perfect for the church service and the walk in the park that would follow. June took particular care with her appearance, wearing her best dress, a deep blue that complemented her fair coloring, and arranging her hair in a style that Martha assured her was most becoming. The service passed in a blur, with June aware of little beyond Quinn's presence in a pew across the aisle and the occasional disapproving glance from Josiah Blackburn, who sat stiffly near the front with his wife. Quinn's eye had developed a spectacular bruise, drawing curious looks and whispered comments, but he bore the attention with dignity, focusing on the preacher's words. After the service, as the congregation filed out into the churchyard, Quinn made his way to June's side. His greeting was formal, mindful of the many eyes upon them, but the warmth in his gaze spoke volumes. "You look lovely today, Miss Taylor," he said, offering his arm. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes," June replied, accepting the gesture with a small smile. "How is your eye feeling?" "Better than it looks," Quinn assured her. "Shall we walk to the park?" They strolled away from the church, aware of the speculative glances following them, but finding that they cared less and less what others thought. The town park was a modest affair, a few benches beneath shade trees, a small gazebo, and a duck pond that attracted children with bread crusts after Sunday services. Quinn guided June to a bench partially screened by a flowering bush, offering some privacy while remaining in public view. They sat close but not touching, observing the proprieties that small-town life demanded. "I've been thinking about our conversation the other night," June began, her hands folded in her lap. "About your offer to court me." Quinn turned toward her, his expression attentive but carefully neutral. "And what conclusions have you reached?" June took a deep breath. "I was hesitant because I feared my judgment was compromised by what happened with Henry. I didn't trust myself to know my own heart." She met his gaze. "But I've come to realize that what I feel for you is entirely different from what I thought I felt for him." Hope flickered in Quinn's eyes. "Different how?" "With Henry, I was dazzled by promises and dreams of a grand future. It was all about what might be someday." June's voice softened. "With you, it's about who you are now, your kindness, your honesty, your steadiness. I don't need promises of someday because I value today." Quinn reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "Are you saying yes to my courtship, June Taylor?" A smile spread across June's face, genuine and unguarded. "I am, Quinn Hayes." The joy that transformed Quinn's features was something June knew she would remember always: the way his eyes crinkled at the corners, the dimple that appeared in his right cheek, the gentle pressure of his fingers tightening around hers. "You've made me a very happy man," he said simply. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, content in their new understanding, before Quinn spoke again. "There's something else I wanted to discuss with you. It's about Blackburn and the water rights issue." June tensed slightly. "Has something happened?" "Not exactly," Quinn assured her. "But I've been considering my options, and I wanted your thoughts." He paused, choosing his words carefully. I could pay Blackburn's increased price. It would strain my resources but wouldn't ruin me. Or I could wait for Judge Parker's return and fight it legally, which would mean a dry summer for part of my herd. Neither option seems ideal, June observed. No, Quinn agreed. There's a third path I've been considering. The Alvarez family owns the property adjoining mine to the north. They have water access they don't fully utilize. I could approach them about purchasing a section of their land. June considered this. Would that solve the problem permanently? It would, Quinn confirmed. And it would send a message to Blackburn that his leverage over me has limits. He studied her face. But it would also mean a significant investment, one that would delay other plans I might have had. The implication was clear, and June felt a flutter of anticipation. What kind of plans? Quinn's expression turned serious. Plans that might include a future beyond just myself. A home that could accommodate a family. Improvements to the ranch house, perhaps even a piano for the parlor someday. The specificity of the last item, a piano, which June had mentioned once in passing as something she'd loved in her childhood home, touched her deeply. He had been listening, planning, hoping. Those sound like wonderful plans, June said softly. Worth delaying, perhaps, but not abandoning. Quinn's smile returned. That's what I hoped you'd say. He hesitated, then added, There's one more thing you should know. If I pursue this course with the Alvarez family, it will likely push Blackburn to further antagonism. He doesn't like being outmaneuvered. June straightened her shoulders. I'm not afraid of Josiah Blackburn, or rather, I won't let fear of him dictate our choices. Our choices, Quinn repeated, the phrase clearly pleasing him. I like the sound of that. They spent the remainder of their walk discussing lighter topics: the upcoming Harvest Festival, Martha's plans to expand the boarding house, Quinn's hopes for his horse breeding program. By the time they returned to town, June felt a sense of partnership forming between them that was unlike anything she'd experienced with Henry. This wasn't about grand gestures or lofty promises. It was about sharing thoughts, respecting each other's opinions, and facing challenges together. At the boarding house steps, Quinn paused, reluctant to end their time together. May I see you again Tuesday? I'll be bringing some horses into the livery. I'd like that, June agreed. She glanced toward the door, where no curious faces were yet visible, and impulsively rose on tiptoes to press a quick kiss to Quinn's cheek. Until Tuesday. Quinn's surprise gave way to pleasure as he touched the spot she had kissed. Until Tuesday, he echoed, his voice warm with promise. The days that followed took on a new sweetness for June. Her work at the boarding house remained busy, but now there was the anticipation of Quinn's visits to Brighton each week. True to his word, he called on her regularly, sometimes just for brief conversations on the porch. Other times for longer excursions, rides along the river, picnics in the shade of cottonwood trees, walks through town where they gradually grew less concerned about the curious glances and whispered comments that followed them. 2 weeks after their agreement to court officially, Quinn invited June to visit his ranch. Martha accompanied them as chaperone, though her knowing smiles whenever Quinn and June shared a private glance suggested she considered her role largely ceremonial. The Hayes Ranch lay about 5 miles outside of town, a sprawling property marked by a simple wooden arch bearing the brand of a stylized H with a lightning bolt through it. As they crested a small rise, the ranch house came into view, a substantial 2-story structure built of stone and timber, with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides and several outbuildings arranged nearby. It's beautiful, June breathed, taking in the peaceful scene. A corral near the main house held several horses that lifted their heads curiously as the riders approached. It's home, Quinn said simply, a note of pride in his voice. He helped June dismount when they reached the yard, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. Martha pretended not to notice as she dismounted on her own, familiar enough with the place to need no assistance. "Let me show you around," Quinn offered, his expression eager as he led June toward the house. The tour revealed a home that was solidly built and well-maintained, though showing signs of bachelor occupancy in its sparse furnishings and practical arrangements. The downstairs consisted of a large kitchen with a sturdy wooden table at its center, a dining room that seemed rarely used, and a comfortable parlor with bookshelves lining one wall. Upstairs were 4 bedrooms Quinn's, Martha's old room preserved largely as she'd left it, a guest room, and one that had belonged to their parents. Throughout the tour, June could sense Quinn watching for her reaction, gauging her response to his home. What struck her most was not the house itself, though it was certainly impressive for a ranch dwelling, but the care with which Quinn had maintained his family's legacy, his mother's needlework still displayed in the parlor, his father's books arranged neatly on the shelves, photographs and mementos that told the story of generations of Hayes who had worked this land. "What do you think?" Quinn asked as they returned to the parlor, where Martha had tactfully remained to give them a moment of privacy. June turned to face him, seeing the vulnerability beneath his casual question. "I think it's a wonderful home, Quinn, full of history and character." Relief and pleasure mingled in his expression. "It could use a woman's touch," he admitted. "Martha keeps telling me so." "Indeed I do," Martha called from her position by the bookshelf. "The place has been crying out for curtains and cushions for years." June laughed at Martha's interjection, but her eyes remained on Quinn's face, reading the unspoken hope there. "I think it has everything essential," she said softly. "The rest are just details." The afternoon continued with a tour of the outbuildings and corrals, where Quinn introduced June to his prize breeding stock with obvious pride. The mare he'd been concerned about had delivered a healthy foal the week before, and June delighted in the gangly creature's attempts to frolic around its mother. As the day drew to a close, and they prepared to ride back to town, Quinn drew June aside near the corral. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "A token of sorts." He withdrew a small carved wooden horse no larger than June's palm. The craftsmanship was exquisite, capturing the spirit and grace of a running Mustang in smooth, polished cedar. "It's beautiful," June said, accepting the gift with wonder. "Did you make this?" Quinn nodded, a hint of self-consciousness in his expression. "Winter evenings are long out here. Carving helps pass the time." He closed her fingers gently around the wooden figure. "My father carved one for my mother when he was courting her. It seemed fitting to continue the tradition." The significance of the gesture wasn't lost on June. This wasn't merely a gift. It was a connection to Quinn's heritage, a linking of past to present with an eye toward future. "I'll treasure it," she promised, her voice soft with emotion. Quinn's hand remained around hers, warm and steady. "June," he began, his tone serious, "I know we haven't known each other long in the grand scheme of things, but I want you to know that my intentions are honorable and my feelings are growing deeper each day." June felt her heart quicken at his words. "Mine too," she admitted. "It's strange I thought after Henry that I'd never trust so easily again, but with you, trust comes naturally." She smiled up at him. "Perhaps because you've never asked me to trust blindly." Quinn's gaze was tender as it rested on her face. "I'd like to kiss you," he said quietly. "Properly. If you'd permit it." June glanced toward the house, where Martha was still inside gathering her things for the ride back. "We shouldn't," she murmured, though her body swayed slightly toward him of its own accord. "Probably not," Quinn agreed, not moving away. "But I'd like to all the same." Their eyes held for a long moment, the air between them charged with unspoken longing. Finally, with a small sigh of surrender, June nodded once. Quinn's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle as he drew her closer. When his lips met hers, the kiss was tender and questioning, a request rather than a demand. June responded with equal gentleness, her free hand coming to rest on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. The kiss remained chaste but lingered, a sweet promise exchanged without words. When they drew apart, Quinn's eyes were dark with emotion, and June knew her own must mirror the same intensity. "I should probably apologize for taking liberties," Quinn said, his voice husky, "but I find I'm not particularly sorry." June couldn't help the small laugh that escaped her. "Neither am I," she confessed, "though we should return to town before Martha comes looking for us." As if summoned by her name, Martha emerged from the house at that moment, calling out to them, "If we're to reach town before dark, we should leave now." The ride back was filled with comfortable conversation, though June was intensely aware of the occasional glances Quinn sent her way, his expression soft with a happiness that echoed her own. Something had shifted between them, moving their courtship from possibility to certainty. The future that had seemed so uncertain weeks ago now held promise that June could almost taste. As summer gave way to early autumn, June and Quinn's courtship deepened. They settled into a rhythm of regular visits, with Quinn coming to town twice a week and June occasionally riding out to the ranch with Martha as chaperone. The townsfolk gradually accepted their relationship as more than a passing fancy, and even the gossip about June's abandoned wedding faded as new topics arose to capture interest. Only Josiah Blackburn remained openly hostile, his disapproval evident whenever their paths crossed. Quinn had proceeded with his plan to purchase land from the Alvarez family, securing water rights that freed him from Blackburn's leverage. The banker had responded by raising interest rates on loans to several businesses that dealt with Quinn, a petty retaliation that nonetheless created tension in the community. Through it all, June found herself growing more confident in her place in Redemption Springs. The boarding house flourished under her and Martha's management, with June's accounting skills and household innovations bringing increased efficiency and comfort. The residents treated her with respect and even affection, and she gradually formed friendships among the townswomen who frequented Martha's weekly sewing circle. Letters from her parents in Denver brought news of her father's improving health and tentative inquiries about her situation. June had written to them shortly after Henry's abandonment, explaining in brief terms what had occurred. Their response had been immediate and concerned, with offers to bring her to Denver and expressions of outrage on her behalf. In her subsequent letters, June had gradually introduced mentions of Quinn, describing him first as a kind friend and later, as their courtship progressed, in more significant terms. "My mother writes that they hope to visit before winter sets in," June told Quinn as they walked together after church one Sunday in late September. "Father's health has improved enough for travel, and they're anxious to see me." Quinn nodded, understanding the significance of this potential visit. "Will you tell them about us before they arrive?" June squeezed his arm where her hand rested. "My last 2 letters have made it quite clear that you're an important part of my life now. I believe they're coming as much to meet you as to see me." A hint of nervousness crossed Quinn's features. "And will they approve, do you think? After what happened with Blackburn, they might be cautious about another suitor so soon." "They will when they meet you," June assured him. "You're nothing like Henry, Quinn. They'll see that immediately." Quinn seemed heartened by her confidence. "I hope so." I'd like their blessing for what I have in mind. June's heart skipped a beat at the implication. They had spoken increasingly of a future together, but neither had explicitly mentioned marriage yet. "And what exactly do you have in mind, Mr. Hayes?" she asked, trying to keep her tone light despite the sudden flutter in her stomach. Quinn's eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled down at her. "Patience, Miss Taylor. Some questions deserve their proper moment." The promise in his words carried June through the days that followed, her anticipation building as her parents' visit drew nearer. They were to arrive on the first Monday of October, staying at the boarding house for a week, before returning to Denver. The night before their arrival, Quinn called at the boarding house with a special request. "I'd like to host a dinner for your parents at the ranch," he proposed. "Nothing elaborate, just a chance for them to see the place and for us to speak privately." "I think they'd like that," June agreed. "When did you have in mind?" "Thursday, if that suits. It will give them time to rest from their journey first." Quinn hesitated, then added, "I've asked Martha to help with the preparations. I want to make a good impression." June was touched by his evident concern. "They'll love you," she assured him, reaching out to straighten his collar in a gesture that had become familiar between them. "Just be yourself." Quinn caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm, his eyes never leaving hers. "That's my plan." Monday dawned clear and cool, a perfect October day as June waited anxiously at the train station for her parents' arrival. Quinn had offered to accompany her, but she declined, feeling it important to greet them privately first. The train pulled in precisely on schedule, belching steam and smoke as it ground to a halt. June scanned the disembarking passengers anxiously until she spotted them: her father, thinner than she remembered but standing straight and tall, and her mother, elegant as always in a well-tailored traveling suit. "Mother, Father," June called, waving to catch their attention. Emotional reunions followed, with embraces and exclamations over how well June looked, "much better than we feared," her mother admitted, and inquiries about their journey. As they collected their luggage and headed toward the waiting buggy Martha had arranged, June felt a surge of happiness at having her family together again, if only temporarily. Back at the boarding house, over tea in the private parlor, June faced the inevitable questions about Henry Blackburn and the wedding that never was. "We never trusted that young man," her father, Jonathan Taylor, stated flatly. "Too smooth by half. Said as much, if you recall." "I recall," June acknowledged with a small smile. "And you were right, as it turns out." Her mother, Eleanor, reached over to pat June's hand. "We're just thankful you discovered his true character before the marriage rather than after, though I wish you had been spared the public humiliation." "It was difficult," June admitted. "But in a strange way, I'm grateful for how things unfolded. If Henry hadn't abandoned me that day, I might never have met Quinn." At the mention of his name, both her parents exchanged knowing glances. "Yes, this Quinn Hayes you've written about," her father said, his tone carefully neutral. "You seem quite fond of him." June couldn't suppress her smile. "I am, very much so." She hesitated, then added simply, "He's a good man, father, the best I've known." Eleanor studied her daughter's face. "You love him," she stated rather than asked. "I do," June confirmed, the admission bringing a sense of rightness that settled in her chest like a warm glow. "And he loves me." Jonathan frowned slightly. "It seems rather sudden, given what you've just been through." "Are you certain you're not simply rebounding from disappointment?" "I understand why you might think that," June acknowledged. "But what I feel for Quinn is entirely different from what I thought I felt for Henry. It's deeper, more real." She met her father's concerned gaze steadily. "You'll understand when you meet him. He's invited us all to dinner at his ranch on Thursday." "Has he indeed?" Jonathan mused, exchanging another glance with his wife. Well, we look forward to making his acquaintance. The days leading up to Thursday's dinner were filled with catching up and showing her parents around Redemption Springs. June introduced them to Martha and the other residents of the boarding house, took them to her favorite spots in town, and gradually filled in the details of her new life that letters couldn't fully convey. They encountered Josiah Blackburn only once, a brief, tense meeting on the street where the banker offered stiff greetings to the Taylors and pointedly ignored June. Her father, noting the interaction, raised an eyebrow in question. "Blackburn blames me for his son's departure," June explained afterward, "as if I somehow engineered being left at the altar." "Typical," Jonathan snorted. "Man never could accept responsibility for his family's failings. Was the same way in business dealings when I knew him." Thursday arrived with a sense of anticipation that had June changing her dress twice before settling on a deep green ensemble that Quinn had once complimented. Martha, who would be joining them for the dinner, helped arrange her hair and offered reassurance. "My brother is half out of his mind with nerves," Martha confided as she pinned a final strand into place. "Had the whole house cleaned top to bottom, spent hours deciding which tablecloth to use, and nearly drove poor Miguel our ranch hand to distraction with instructions about the yard." June laughed, though she felt her own flutter of nerves. "I've never seen Quinn anything but composed." "That's because he hasn't been trying to impress your father before," Martha pointed out with a knowing smile. "This dinner means a great deal to him." Quinn arrived to collect them precisely on time, driving a well-maintained buggy with enough room for all 5 of them. He was dressed in his Sunday best, his hair neatly trimmed, his usually weathered face freshly shaved. The formal introduction to June's parents revealed a hint of the nerves Martha had mentioned, but his handshake was firm and his gaze direct as he greeted Jonathan and Alina Taylor. "Mr. and Mrs. Taylor, it's an honor to meet you," Quinn said with genuine warmth. "June speaks of you often and with great affection." "Does she indeed?" Jonathan replied, studying Quinn with undisguised scrutiny. "She's had quite a bit to say about you as well, young man." "All good, I hope," Quinn responded with a smile that eased some of the tension. Alina stepped forward, her expression more welcoming than her husband's. "It's lovely to meet you, Mr. Hayes. We understand we have you to thank for helping our daughter during a difficult time." "The pleasure was mine, madam," Quinn assured her. "Your daughter has been a blessing to this community since she arrived." The drive to the ranch passed pleasantly enough, with conversation focusing on neutral topics: the unusually mild autumn weather, the Taylors' impressions of Redemption Springs, Quinn's brief explanation of the history of his property as they approached. June watched her parents' reactions as the ranch came into view, noting her father's appraising glance at the well-maintained buildings and fences, her mother's appreciation of the carefully tended flower beds that flanked the main house. "You have a fine place here, Hayes," Jonathan commented as Quinn helped Alina from the buggy. "Been in your family long, 3 generations," Quinn replied, assisting June down next. "My grandfather homesteaded the original parcel after the war and my father expanded it. I've added some acreage to the north recently." Jonathan nodded approvingly. "Good land is the best investment a man can make." Inside, the ranch house had been transformed from its usual bachelor simplicity. Fresh flowers adorned the tables, the furniture gleamed with polish, and delicious aromas wafted from the kitchen where Miguel's wife, Rosa, had been cooking since early morning. Dinner was served in the rarely used formal dining room, the table set with the Hayes family's best china and silver. Quinn sat at the head with June to his right, her parents opposite her, and Martha at the foot of the table. The food was excellent roast beef with all the trimmings, fresh vegetables from the garden, and an apple pie that Quinn proudly announced was made from fruit grown in their own orchard. Conversation flowed more easily as the meal progressed. Quinn spoke knowledgeably about his horse breeding operation. Jonathan shared stories of his experiences in business, and Alina and Martha discovered a shared interest in quilting. June watched the interactions with growing hope, seeing the initial wariness in her father's manner gradually giving way to genuine interest in Quinn's perspectives. After dinner, Martha suggested showing Alina her collection of quilting patterns, tactfully creating an opportunity for Quinn to speak privately with Jonathan. As the women moved toward the parlor, Quinn invited June's father to join him on the porch for a cigar. June caught Quinn's eye as he passed, offering a small smile of encouragement. He returned it with a barely perceptible nod, his expression a mixture of determination and hope that made her heart swell with affection. In the parlor, Martha and Alina were soon deep in conversation about fabric choices and stitching techniques. June participated minimally, her thoughts on the conversation taking place on the porch. After what seemed an eternity, but was likely only 20 minutes, the door opened to admit Quinn and her father. One look at Quinn's face told June everything she needed to know. His expression was one of barely contained joy, his eyes seeking hers immediately as he entered the room. Jonathan, following behind, wore a thoughtful expression, but the earlier skepticism had vanished. "Ladies," Quinn addressed them, his voice steady despite the emotion June could see in his eyes. "If you'll excuse me for a moment, there's something I need to fetch from upstairs." When he returned moments later, he carried a small wooden box that June had never seen before. The conversation in the room died away as Quinn crossed to where June sat, then, to her astonishment, lowered himself to one knee before her. "June Taylor," he began, his voice strong and clear despite the intimacy of the moment. "When you came into my life, you were standing alone at a train station in your wedding dress, abandoned by a man who didn't deserve your love. I told you then that he didn't deserve you, but I might." He opened the small box, revealing a delicate gold ring with a modest but perfect diamond. "I've spent every day since trying to prove myself worthy of your heart. I love you, June. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears welled in June's eyes as she looked from the ring to Quinn's face, seeing there all the love and sincerity that had been missing in Henry's grand proposals. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, Quinn, I would be proud to be your wife." Quinn's hands trembled slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to his feet, drawing her up with him. Their kiss was brief but tender, mindful of their audience yet unable to contain the joy of the moment. When they turned to face the others, June was met with her mother's teary smile, her father's gruff nod of approval, and Martha's unabashed delight. "Welcome to the family, officially," Martha said, coming forward to embrace June warmly. "You have our blessing," Alina added, joining the embrace. Jonathan cleared his throat, emotion making his voice rougher than usual. "He's a good man, Juniper," he said, using his childhood name for her. "We couldn't ask for better for our daughter." Later, as they prepared to return to town, Quinn drew June aside for a moment of privacy in the parlor. "Are you happy?" he asked, his hands gentle as they held hers. June looked up at the man who had rescued her on what should have been her wedding day, who had offered friendship when she needed it most, and whose love had healed her heart in ways she hadn't thought possible. "Happier than I ever imagined being," she answered truthfully. "When Henry left me at that station, I thought my life was over. I couldn't see that it was just beginning." Quinn bent to kiss her, a gesture no longer tentative but filled with promise. "We'll have a good life together, June Hayes," he murmured against her lips. "That's a promise I know I can keep." As the buggy carried them back toward town under a canopy of stars, June leaned against Quinn's solid warmth, her parents and Martha engaged in conversation across from them. The weight of the ring on her finger was new but already familiar, a tangible symbol of the future they would build together. Henry Blackburn and his betrayal now seemed like a distant memory, a painful chapter closed. In its place was the beginning of a new story, one written not in grand gestures and extravagant promises, but in the steady rhythm of days shared and challenges faced together. A love story that had begun with a jilted bride and a cowboy's simple offer, and would continue through all the seasons of their lives. June looked up at the stars scattered across the Texas sky and silently thanked whatever fate or providence had brought Quinn Hayes to that train station on what had been both the worst and, as it turned out, the best day of her life. 3 months later, on a crisp January morning, June Taylor became June Hayes in a simple ceremony at the Redemption Springs Church. Unlike her previous wedding plans, this one went forward without a hitch, attended by townsfolk who had come to respect and appreciate the couple's steadfast devotion to each other. Josiah Blackburn was conspicuously absent, though rumors had reached town that Henry had married his saloon girl in San Francisco and was working as a clerk in his uncle's shipping business, a far cry from the banking career his father had envisioned for him. As Quinn and June exchanged vows, their eyes never leaving each other's faces, Martha dabbed at tears beside a leaner Taylor in the front pew. Jonathan, who had given his daughter away with a mixture of pride and emotion, nodded approvingly throughout the ceremony, his earlier reservations completely dissolved. The celebration afterward at the Hayes Ranch was joyful and relaxed, with food and music and dancing that continued well into the evening. When the last guests had departed, and June found herself alone with her husband in the home that was now hers as well, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. "Happy, Mrs. Hayes?" Quinn asked, drawing her into his arms. June smiled up at him, her heart full to bursting with love for this steady, honorable man who had seen her value when she'd been at her lowest. "Completely, Mr. Hayes," she assured him. "This is exactly where I'm meant to be." And as his lips met hers in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, June knew with absolute certainty that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as heartbreak, and that true love isn't found in grand gestures but in the quiet strength of a hand held through both joy and sorrow. In the years that followed, the Hayes Ranch flourished under their joint care. June brought her organizational skills and business acumen to complement Quinn's knowledge of horses and land management. Together they weathered droughts and storms, celebrated the birth of their children, first a daughter with Quinn's green eyes, then twin boys with June's determined spirit, and built a life rich with love and purpose. Martha eventually married the town's new doctor, a widower with a young son, but remained a frequent visitor and beloved aunt to the Hayes children. June's parents divided their time between Denver and extended visits to the ranch, Jonathan finding renewed health in the Texas air, and Alina delighting in her grandchildren. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep and the day's work done, June and Quinn would sit together on the porch, watching the stars emerge above the land they both loved. In those moments, June would often think back to that fateful day at the train station, how a heart-wrenching ending had, in truth, been the most beautiful beginning. For she had stood in her wedding dress beside her trunk, abandoned and alone, when a cowboy had said the words that changed her life. "He doesn't deserve you, but I might." and Quinn Hayes had spent every day since proving just how right he had been.